Welcome to week 4 on R795 in the spring semester. Every week we have some people to pop in and pop out and tell us a little bit about what they're all about. And only a couple of weeks, we're going to hear from methodology people and researchers who are doing innovative things. And this is one of those weeks. We're also going to hear from Vanessa Dennett at Florida State in systematic reviews of the research in a couple of weeks down the line. We'll hear from Professor John Hitchcock, who used to be part of IST. He now works for a consulting company in DC, and he'll be in talking about mixed methods and blended learning. Alyssa will talk about more than just research methods. We're going to start off really with a couple questions for my class, and then we're going to get into some of what she's been researching over the past decade or so, and her new book and that kind of thing. So Chris Herrera, Hoijong, Yua is here. Yuachin is here from Toronto. She is my doc student and looking to study personalized learning and adaptive learning and that kind of stuff, which kind of fits in with the learning analytics that we're going to be talking about. So that's great. Barbara, where are you from again? I forgot now.
I'm up in the northern part of the state, so I'm faculty at IU South Bend,
Right,
but I live in LaPorte.
So it's South Bend, IU South, good place. And Tawfik, you're in Bloomington, right?
Yes, I am.
And Tawfik's a doctoral student in Bloomington, and Ji Young's a doctoral student in Bloomington, and Hoijong's a doctoral student in Bloomington. A PhD, we have at least three PhD students here. And then we have several EDD, Chris and Barbara. And Omita's an EDD, but not in this class. She just pops into my classes all the time, and it's great to have her. So Alyssa was in the master's program in IST, and she was so smart. See, that's why she has the last name of Wise. And she's so kind. Her middle name is Friend. So Alyssa Friend Wise is so kind and nice. We let her just graduate after a master's in IST. But someone corralled her back in, and maybe it was Sasha Barab or Tom Duffy or somebody said, you really need to get a doctorate. And so she did get her doctorate in learning sciences after getting her master's degree in IST. And she found a job at Simon Fraser University. And now I'm missing Alyssa. Did we lose? There she is. Okay. You're
I'm still here.
Hollywood Squares. And she moved to work with my friends in Burnaby. Are you at Burnaby or are you downtown campus?
I was actually down in Surrey, the third campus.
Surrey, okay. So Burnaby's on a big mountaintop because I did one of my sabbaticals there in 1998. And it's a beautiful place. Vancouver's a wonderful place. And at the time she moved there, the exchange rate got really good to Canada, and she was making more money than when she agreed to get paid. I mean, I'm guessing, you know. And
it's funny. It was a huge difference. The dollar jumped by like 1 to 1.3 after I signed my contract. So that was a surprise.
I've had other people doing the opposite, you know.
Yeah.
They've gone to UCLA during the retrenchments and stuff. Now, Jennifer Park is also from Canada. She's Canadian. She says and about and all center, all those other words. Jennifer lived in Montreal, and she lived in Vancouver. She's got family in Vancouver. So maybe you're close to, Jennifer, what part of Vancouver did you live?
I grew up in Burnaby, actually.
Okay. Yeah. And she also maybe has a Korean citizenship on top of that. Maybe not. But she has citizenship in Canadian and soon to be US as well. Jennifer's done great things since getting her master's. As I said, she got a standing dissertation award and is doing great research and other kinds of things, just like Alyssa. So Alyssa first went to the west side. Now she's on the east side. She's working at NYU, and she's interested in social network analysis, predictive modeling, natural language processing, working with basically large data sets. And she's formed, I think she formed, maybe someone else formed it, the Learning Analytics Research Network. And she's the director of the Learn Center at NYU. She's done brilliant work, tons of publications. If you've not been to her website. Her H and I index and all these other Google Scholar metrics are off the charts in terms of someone who graduated, maybe it was 15. Can you believe that's 15 years ago, 2007? And it's getting close to 16. I'll just say 15 because
Round down, please.
I did sponsor her before she left to do an independent study. I think it was in Dominican Republic.
Yep.
And at the time, it might have been dangerous when she went there for whatever reason. Something sticks in my mind that it wasn't dangerous. At all?
No, it was very safe. It was the challenges there started after. It was pretty safe when I was down there.
And so a lot of the students who are studying in the Learning Science program at the start of the Learning Science program were really interested in computer-supported collaborative learning and in computer-supported collaborative learning environments and STEM and all sorts of other things. I will stop at this point before I start asking questions, and I will have Alyssa fill in some of those gaps for me. Well, like what dates did you move around, and what things were you studying, and how did it all change over time? What were you interested when you started at IU as a master's? How did it change when you went off to Vancouver, and then how did it change again when you went to NYU?
So I'm going to take the story back a little bit. So first, let me say thank you for that lovely introduction, Kurt. And whatever my metrics look like, they're a drop in the pail of ocean compared to all the different work that you have done over the years and the different lives that you've touched. It's pretty special and amazing to come back and be on this call with you as a professor and a colleague when you were one of the very first professors I had when I started my program, I think.
Thank you.
And I have many, many fond memories. I don't remember if I took R795. Frankly, the numbers escape me at this point, but I know I took a couple classes with you, and I distinctly remember when I was telling you about running across the bridge on my bike, I remember I think you flew back from Asia and somehow still had time to put on a Mickey Mouse costume before class. I don't remember. You were making a point. What the point is, I can't remember, but I remember that you found time to put on that costume and get yourself there to make sure not only were we learning things, but we were enjoying and entertained, and it was very, very memorable. So
yes, I remember the costume.
You remember that,
and I remember the skit too. It's a 10 mini miss of e-learning. I also had the Dr. Evil outfit and all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm no longer funny though. So now my students requested that I be serious. So I no longer.
I mean, I see you have a tie on, so that's very strange. I understand. The other thing I just
same tie for the third day in a row. It's a new one.
The other thing I was going to say that I remembered was we were doing this course, and it was probably the mini myths of e-learning. It was a course on e-learning, and you would set up some sort of discussion board, but you had gone ahead and set up, I think, about 100 different logins. And the logins were all famous people. So instead of logging in to make discussion posts ourselves, you could log in as, Piaget, and I think the password was Jean, and you could log in as Vygotsky, and the password was Leo. And, because later I did a whole bunch of research on roles and thinking about, CSCL and collaborative learning. We talk about roles, but we don't talk about really embodying them in that way. And, it made it anonymous. And I remember having some very interesting discussions where we had to take on those personalities. So those are just two anecdotes that I remember from classes with Kurt back in the day.
Let me stop you real quick to say that
Okay.
Sune is doing a dissertation on such kinds of things like role play and debate from last semester's class. And Jungwon Her is here, who was in the program working for Karen Hallett in the instructional consulting office when you were finishing your doctorate, or maybe. So Jungwon, do you remember Alyssa or not? Did you ever run into her? You're muted.
No, I met her at a conference, and I know that she's doing a fantastic job, but she's 1 year, earlier than me. So I don't think I took any class with her, but I know that she's doing a fantastic job.
Yeah, everyone knows she's doing a fantastic job. I sent out emails and everyone wrote back, said, oh, I got to be there for this. So Jungwon was right behind you, and so Maria Salamou says hi back. So from
I remember
yeah,
Maria.
yeah. So
So to answer your question about my bio, what I thought I might share is some of the things that you don't find on the internet, which is what happened before I got to IU. So my background was originally, I was a chemistry undergraduate, loved science, didn't love being isolated in the lab. And so after grad school, I ended up down in South America teaching high school physics. I got hired to teach high school chemistry, but a week before they said, actually, nope, you're teaching physics. And this was, year 2000, the early days of the World Wide Web and all of that. And so I quickly became the computer expert, mainly because I was the only one foolish enough to try things, right? Everybody didn't know what they were doing, but some of us were willing to try and others weren't. And I think there's a lesson for that with all the stuff coming out with AI, right? Like you have to be the one tinkering around and messing and figuring out what something can do. So I quickly went from being, a physics teacher to being a physics and computer technology teacher, also running the school's website. And I think I did that for around 3 years. And then I realized I was very interested in understanding how all this technology was helping us learn and helping us connect with each other. That's where the sort of collaboration piece came in. And again, this was what, 2000, 2002. So from South America, I figured out how to take my GREs and I started researching grad school. And very foolishly, perhaps at the time, I just, the websites were terrible back then, but I found, a couple of faculty at a couple of schools that were interesting. And I wrote them this very presumptive email saying how interested I was in their program, but I wanted to know how it was going to land me a job and how did they integrate theory and what was I going to learn and why would it be worth my time? And many people wrote back. Some answers were better than others, but IU was a clear standout. And so I came and I was very focused on the technology when I arrived, and I joined IST. And I remember very well those, I don't know if they still have them, those master's courses, especially the production ones when we were just learning a new tool each week and building things, and then moving through that. And somewhere along the way, they formed the learning sciences department. So that didn't exist when I was there. It kind of happened while I was there. And for, reasons that I don't remember at this point, I was like, okay, well, I'll go do my PhD over there. And people like to say I was the first graduate, but technically I was the second.
Who was the first?
It was Carolyn, and she moved back to New Zealand and no one ever heard from her since. So this is why I get said that I was the first, but I wasn't the first. I acknowledge Carolyn was the very first. She was someone who came and transferred in with Dick Lesh when they brought him in. So anyway, and through all of that, I was doing a lot of work on online learning, a lot of work on collaboration. But I mean, let's be honest, I was a grad student. I was doing the work that professors wanted me to work on. It wasn't my own agenda. So I worked with Kurt. He sponsored that independent study, but also we did a project with the online MBA, the project there too, right?
Right. That was a big project.
Yeah, that was a big one. I was thinking there was a smaller piece of that big project, but we were looking at the online MBA in the Kelly School. And, I did some work. My advisor was Tom Duffy, and we published a bunch of things looking at teacher preparation and online discussion forums. And somehow I got lucky enough to get hired straight out of grad school into a professor position, which I think is pretty rare these days. It wasn't that crazy at the time. And without really knowing what the heck I was doing, I went up to Simon Fraser University in Vancouver and started to really try and develop my research agenda. And I would say the first 2 years I would characterize by a lot of flailing. And, it was very different going from being a really good grad student who could help professors fulfill their vision to suddenly being the one who had to have my own vision. So a lot of flailing. We did some studies on roles, did some other studies. And then, I remember very distinctly, I had this kind of weird idea to draw these graphs for how to analyze online discussion. And they were very colorful and they started out hand-drawn and they got more complicated. And I never got a real publication out of them. I think it was like a conference poster or something, but something in like thinking through all those ideas about how to analyze discussion posts hit me with a brainstorm moment of, we're always looking about how people talk online, but talking is only one half of collaboration. The other part is listening. And you might say, well, it's only easy to capture the talking part, but that's not true. I mean, even right now, we're not doing it. Kurt's recording this, but you could look at people's faces. You could look at to see whether they're leaning in and interested. Are they leaning back and confused? different ways that people react. Now maybe facial expressions on Zoom, especially when you might be looking at something else on your screen besides me, aren't the best indicator. There's problems there. But this was earlier on. So we were talking about discussion forums, and we realized there was all this clickstream data that we could understand how people listened to other people's posts, not just by how they replied to them, but what did they click on when, in what order, how long did they spend there? And so I got this sort of idea, and as all good ideas do, I'd been thinking about it for 2 years. Then I had to write the grants in about 2 weeks. And I put together this grant, submitted it to SSHRC, which is kind of the big granting agency for educational work in Canada. And suddenly I had a 3-year funded research project to investigate how people interacted online, and not just how they talked, but how they listened, and how those two things related. And so, we started off trying to figure out, what do you do with all this clickstream data, right? A clickstream data just shows this person clicked on this post at this point in time, but what do you do with that? And we started to look at the orders in which they clicked, how long they spent on a post. We realized that if you knew how long a post was and how long they spent, you could estimate if they spent enough time there to engage with it or not. You don't know if they were looking at it the whole time, but when people are clicking really fast, they're not. And so we came up with all these metrics, and we started to realize that there was different ways of understanding how people attended to posts. They could be very focused or very broad. They could go very deep. They could go very shallow. We related this to how they then discussed with each other. It led to one of my master's students developing a new online interface that was a visual radial diagram that encouraged people to click on chains of related posts. And somewhere in all of this, and I'm telling this story in a purposefully serendipitous way, because I do think that's how lots of research develops. Like, it's not, you look back at it and it looks like everyone planned what they were doing, but that's not really true. But just around then, I went to Vancouver in 2007. And in 2012, just before I went up for tenure, the Learning Analytics Conference had started. So they started at 2011 up in Edmonton. And it was a small group of people who just had some idea that data science in education was going to be an important thing.
Was it George Siemens involved in it? I guess he
Yeah,
did the first MOOC, and I think he started that as well. He's now running that conference at UNT Arlington down in Dallas. And it's coming up, I think, next month maybe, or something like that, right?
Yeah. So the LAC conference is happening. So George is all over the place. He's actually in Australia most of the time, but he's still affiliated with Arlington. So he'll be back. And yes, many of us are going down to Texas to Arlington in, I guess, about a month and a half. And but what happened was they had the first conference, and there was just this sort of suspicion that all this process data that was being generated automatically when we interact in online environments was going to be interesting and useful and important. And so they had a small conference their first year. My understanding, it was very cold and snowy. But in the second year, it happened in Vancouver. And as academic serendipity is, it was something I was interested in, but I wasn't really working in the area, but the conference was coming to Vancouver. And so I thought, yeah, maybe I'll check it out. And then there was a workshop, and the workshop was all about collaboration and learning analytics. So, I signed up, and then I thought, hey, well, maybe I could present the work I'm doing. I don't know if it really fits. So I went and shared what I was doing. And I remember very distinctly, Simon Buckingham-Shum, who's at UTS Sydney, another big name in the field. I guess he was the discussant of the workshop, but he got out afterwards and he said, it's amazing all you're learning about what students do, but I wouldn't really call it learning analytics until you're actually showing that data back to students or instructors. You're closing the loop. So that's a big, depends who you talk to, but a big defining feature that distinguishes learning analytics from educational data science is we're not just trying to learn about students with data science. We're trying to do something that can be automated in real time to give a signal back to improve the learning, whatever the learning is. So basically, he sort of said it'd be great if you could do that. And, I don't know, I was this young scholar. And so I jumped up and said, all right, I'll see you next year. And so that was basically what we did for research that year. We said, okay, how do we automate all these traces? How do we create a system where students could see how they were listening and do a study to understand if that would help them change? And it turns out, not surprisingly, it does. And so, you go back to LAC 13 and you see my first actual learning analytics paper. So that was sort of how quite a bit of that started. And that's sort of how I moved a little bit from CSCL to using process data and data mining methods to learning analytics. And somewhere along there, a little bit later, I went through, I got tenure, I went on sabbatical, was getting deeper and deeper into learning analytics. And then this job posting came up for NYU, and they were looking at somebody who was doing the intersection of learning sciences, CSCL, and learning analytics. And I don't know if anyone's had this happen, but I read the job ad and I felt like someone who knew me wrote it for me. That's not true. It's not how it happened, but that's what it felt like. So
I think I saw you in Vancouver right before the year. I think on sabbatical, I met you in Vancouver. I was at a conference or something. Your life was
it was ARA. We were at the very, very top. You were having a party in a suite that was many floors in the air.
Yeah.
Right?
So a couple of things here. We've got Zihong is going to that conference too. IU is an institutional member. So Zihong, you could meet Alyssa. If anyone else is going to that conference down in Arlington, do reach out and maybe they can get IU get together or IU toast or drink or something of that nature. We have a Jamboard posting. So if anyone has a question for Alyssa, there's a link at the top there that was put in by Sunne. Thank you, Sunne. Go ahead and type that in. I just wanted to point out, Alyssa, we skipped the second question that we had set up. I'm not sure if you want to wait until the end, but before we go to NYU, we have a lot of people who are dissertation proposal mindset right now.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions that we had here in terms of those who might be, advanced doctoral students, what was it like for you leading up to your proposal and your final dissertation defense? Do you have any kind of advices for these people in terms of even just ginning up a possible topic and how you go about that, how you recruit people to be supportive of you, and other kinds of things so you can get done and get one of these, get a job?
Yeah, those are all good questions. I mean, in some ways, if you're doing grad school right, you should be thinking of it as sort of phase 0 of your career, right? Because I mean, academia is entirely built on relationships, right? If you're editing a journal and you need to get people to do reviews, you need to have relationships, right? Why am I here now talking to you? Because Kurt and I have a relationship. So having academic relationships of people who know you, understand you and your work, value the contributions you bring, that's the kind of thing that's really powerful. And especially in learning analytics, there's grad students who build a name for themselves before they even, graduate. So I think, when you're thinking about all of these things, you have to start to think of yourself as being in the next phase of your career. Think of yourself as, you're already looking at your professional trajectory. So, I mean, there's a lot of things to balance. I think one thing that's important, and I think, no matter where you are in your grad program, whether you're in semester 1, 2, 3, 4, or higher number, every class you take should be an opportunity to kind of like explore new areas and keep an eye out for a really exciting dissertation topic. You want to do the work well, but in some ways, just picking a topic that you can say, hey, this is an interesting and important thing that no one else is doing, or no one else is doing the way I'm going to do, or no one else is doing well. And I could argue why it's the most important thing to happen right now. So, thinking about influence and impact, it can just be interesting, but you got to imagine, why is someone going to want to read it, right? In academia, sometimes we put all this effort into things that get read by an audience of 3 or 4 people. And I think trying to figure out where the field is at and where you can make a contribution, that's something we talk about in the journals all the time. Like, how are you going to contribute to this knowledge base? How are you going to build on what's there in a new and interesting direction that someone else hasn't thought of, such that other people are going to want to build on your work? And I think a lot of that's really important before you get down to the nuts and bolts of writing a good proposal.
Let me pause you there. We've got Kiri Fong is with us as well. She's a PhD student. I know of her because I met her mother in Beijing. She was running a center at Beijing Normal at the time, and she talked about her daughter doing great things. And so I wanted to mention, we have half EDD students and half PhD students. And EDD students normally have a full-time job and might be looking to move up. Okay. PhD students typically don't have a job. One of my EDD students today wrote to me. He finished a year and a half, 2 years ago. About he's an accounting professor at BYU, and I'm a former accountant. And he got all excited today because he got his first peer-reviewed publication out, and so he was sending it to me and other people on his committee. So if those of you on the EDD track, you can get a lot of excitement and just getting a small article out. It doesn't have to be this monstrous, long, arduous, with a task with a giant research team. I mean, everything everything that you produce can have an audience. And this one was in a tax accounting journal that was highly read, and he's going to have a lot of people contacting him for what he wrote. So, you just never know. Sometimes, and that's the case. You don't know which articles or things that you do or speeches that you give or books that you write are going to be the things that hit until it happens. You just don't know. So hey, let me ask, before we go to NYU and other things, give us a couple of things that you did that were really successful. You had no clue would be successful, and why do you think they were a success, or a lot of hits, or a lot of reads, or whatever?
I mean, oh geez, that's a hard question. Let me look at my Google Scholar profile and see what is most cited. I mean, I will tell you one thing that I have noticed recently, looking at what gets a lot of hits and what gets a lot of reads, is things that really offer new ways to look at things. Like, certainly you want to be doing an empirical study that moves things forward, but the things that people remember help them see the world in a new way. And you can do that in an empirical piece. So I feel, I've been surprised by how much sort of play and interest a lot of editorials I've written have gotten. That's probably been the biggest surprise to me. And I guess this might be a little more different for specifically learning analytics as a technical field, but for us, I was just thinking about journal articles, but in fact, conference publications are incredibly impactful. And when you think about from an EDD perspective, you might think also about sort of practical reports. So Learning Analytics Conference and the journal both have a practical reports track, which is a way to get out work that is sort of more practical in nature, which is often can be the nature of EDD work. It's sort of, it can be theoretical, but it's always really grounded in a context. And I guess, trying to figure out who's your audience, right? Who's going to be interested in what you're reading, and how do you put something in a place where they'll find it?
Couple things I need to point out. So Simni's studying online discussion and role play right now. Xiaojing did a reanalysis of Trina's data for her dissertation. And Trina is your book co-authored. I don't know if you know this, Xiaojing, but Alyssa and Trina have a book together. And Renee is studying online collaboration of Chinese students in one of the classes in the East Asian Studies Center, or where is that class that you're studying, Renee?
Freshman English writing.
Yeah. A second language English learning, or
multilingual speaker.
Yeah. And Belle and I and Xiaojing are looking at now starting a study of AI based language learning and looking at GB chat and other kinds of things. Belle, you want to explain the study we've started real briefly before Alyssa moves on?
So we're trying to look at how YouTubers or YouTube content creators perceive the use of ChatGPT on language education. Very brief.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Sorry to interrupt, Alyssa. Do you have any other thing came to mind of something that got a lot of invites or claims or something else that again you maybe didn't expect to happen?
It's a little different than what you're asking, but I remember when I applied for the job at SFU and I was getting my CV together, and I just kind of put everything on it. And, CVs can be absurdly long. And I remember throwing on the fact that I taught high school physics and computers. And to me, that wasn't really relevant. I was a researcher now. It was this little thing I happened to stick on. And it was incredibly important to them. The fact that I had classroom experience, I think if I hadn't had that, I wouldn't have actually gotten the interview or the job. And I would have never imagined that. So it's a little different than the thing I wrote. But, in some ways, you really don't know what's going to resonate with people. And so that was an example of sort of showing sort of the breadth of your expertise beyond sort of the narrow thing you become an expert in can be very powerful. It's a little different than what you asked, but it's kind of the same principle.
Yeah, and that was in Brazil, I think, right? Or in maybe a couple different countries.
It was in Ecuador.
Ecuador, okay. And Zhang Wan, for her dissertation, was looking at an online community of teachers discussions about, I think, just solving different issues or like a community of practice kind of thing. Was that Zhang Wan? Did I have that right? Using Neighbor, I think,
No, I look at three different online teacher community and wanted to understand why teachers wanted to join online community. At that time, we didn't have a Facebook and all kind of social media. It's more like discussion forum.
So Alyssa, you're in a land of friendly people. They've all interested in similar kinds of things. Maybe we need to journey over to NYU. What brought you over to NYU? What kinds of things have you done there? Has it evolved over time? And have you picked up a New York accent?
Well, I mean, you want me to talk with a New York accent, I can do it, but really, no one talks like this, okay? I'm originally from New York, so anything I have, I've had my whole life. So I came to New York because they had advertised for a position that literally was written for me. And one thing that was powerful is they were doing a cluster hire. So they hired 3 of us who were focused on learning analytics from different perspectives at the same time. And they had the idea of having this center, but they really had not totally figured out what it was going to be and who was going to lead it. So we engaged in a year to 2 of sort of conversations to figure out what it was going to be. And that ended up being something I shaped pretty strongly. And I became the, inaugural and until now only director of NYU Learn, the Learning Analytics Research Network. So I would say, one of the biggest things that changed the move to NYU is running this research network that was, provostally endowed and had connections across the university with central IT, with faculty across the university. Is, I really, I was already at the associate level, but I really stepped up into it's not me doing my research, but it's running a project, running a team, running an organization that's got a public-facing vision. And at the same time, this is when I stepped in to run. I made the poor choice of bidding to run the LAC conference in Vancouver right before I moved. So I organized the LAC conference in Vancouver in 2017 from New York. I don't recommend that. And then I finished running the conference and stepped on as editor of the journal. And then I was also associate editing the Journal of Learning Sciences. And so I felt like I was just sort of thought leadership, 24/7. So I think the big difference there was, we were doing projects, but I went from doing them to directing them and really sort of setting visions out and then putting teams in place to fulfill them.
We have our first question in the Jamboard. Who posted that question? You can go ahead and ask it.
Alyssa, I saw the word subversive in a recent article title, and you were talking about getting more reads. And I wondered if you looked at like most used words, or I'm going to use this phrase, clickbait type words, because I see the word subversive and I want to read it.
Good. Read it, please. I guess that paper, I feel like that paper's gotten an average number of reads. I would like it to get more attention. We did not put the word there to be clickbaity. We put the word there to be provocative, which to me is different. I don't know if you guys know Pierre Dillenberg, a big CSCL researcher in Switzerland. He literally would come to conferences and say, today I'm taking the role of the provocateur, and he would be provocative. And, I think maybe that's something that now that I'm a full professor, I felt like I have the positionality to do, right? You don't necessarily do that when you're a little more junior. But we really wanted to challenge notions. We wanted something that would draw attention, but not in a clickbaity way, because the notion is subversive really captured the core idea of what we were talking about in that paper, which is that, learning analytics as a field, if we don't do anything otherwise, is setting up data to understand how things have happened in the past and how to sort of replicate the past in the future. It's very much about how do people exist and succeed in the system as it is. And we argue that if education is about making productive change, sometimes we need to change the system. So, subversive learning analytics, what if learning analytics was designed to change the system, not reinforce it? So it's, coming from a very critical theory perspective. And but I do think, not in a clickbait way, but coining a good term, if you're looking for techniques as a grad student, coining a good term is a pretty good way to, get citations, but also get known, because a good term is really shorthand for you had a great idea or you had a great way of expressing an idea. So I'm not trying, I'm hopefully expressing this very non-cynically, but you don't want to just coin terms left and right, especially for ones that we don't need. But if you find an important idea that doesn't have good language, or that doesn't have clear language, or that doesn't have language at all, finding a way, like, for example, I'll give you another example that I think's gotten more play than subversive learning analytics. So we're doing a workshop at LAC online, if anyone wants to come. It's going to be cool, is human-centered learning analytics. I feel like I was doing that before the term got coined, but people coined that term and it was powerful, and it's coalesced a community. And I'd say that's the other big change since I've been at NYU, is we've really focused less on what the tool is and more the processes for design and how to center the users of the tool. Like yesterday, we ran a workshop with high-level administrators from a certain part of the university, because we're helping develop a dashboard for them. And so that's the kind of work that a good term enables.
Just as an aside, you came to IU Bloomington 4 years ago, right before the pandemic. It was maybe a year before or 2 months before, maybe the fall before the pandemic. Omida was at that talk with me, and I don't know if anyone else in here was. Omida, right? You were sitting across from me, I think, at that session. The talk we had, the chat we had with you afterwards, just to make the connection there.
Okay. Yeah.
So it was a great talk that you gave. Do you have your slides posted that they might be able to go and take a look at them later? And because that was a marvelous. I'm sure you've done many more.
I was like, I don't even remember which talk we're talking about, but I can tell you that anything I posted for a period when I was being good about it, which has kind of died since then, is on SlideShare. So if you want to find out all my presentations that are online, I just threw in.
There we go. Okay, great. Yeah, I used to be good at it, but not anymore. Let's go to your book and plug your book a little bit with Trina. It's a comprehensive guide to analyzing digital interaction in informal and formal learning spaces, establishes new research methods, gets at the challenges of social exchanges, meaning making, and so forth. It's called Looking for Insight, Transformation, and Learning in Online Talk.
Yeah, so this is a very cool book, and it also goes to show that the friends and colleagues you make at grad school can later be your co-authors, right? So Trina was 1 or 2 years ahead of me at IU, and particularly because I was moving to IU from Ecuador, and she'd come back from the Peace Corps somewhere else. I think it was in Africa. They had hooked me up with her as a mentor. So she was kind of my first friend, colleague, mentor at IU, and now my co-author. And we were both interested in online conversations. She does much more qualitative work. I do much more quantitative work. And the book is really cool because if you want to go and do any sort of research study in social media or discussion forums, and you're like, how do I do this and do it well? The book basically walks you through it. It's a very guide to doing research. And, without going into the chapter names, it starts off by helping you figure out what is the thing you want to study? Like, how do you really clarify your question, which is the start to any good research. And then it points out all of the different assumptions about epistemology we often make about online conversations. Is language an expression of what I already thought, or is a language a way that I work through my thinking? Do we think there's an external reality, or is it something we're negotiating? So these are the kinds of questions, and it just sort of helps you figure out where are you on each of these dimensions. And it's written with really cool graphics that help you sort of put yourself in a box. And then it says, okay, well, if that's the case, how do I sample? Sampling is so huge for online talk. Like, how do I understand all of the talk that I want to say I care about? And then of that talk, how do I pick what to look at? And then it dives into methods. So I did the quant chapter, she did the qual, but the quant chapter, it talks about things like, how do you use NLP to automatically do content analysis of your data? Or how do you do topic modeling? Or how do you do hierarchical linear modeling, which is really important in collaborative learning because people who are talking with each other in conversation can't be considered independent. Obvious, but statistically, how do you deal with it? And then once you've done all those quantitative techniques, how has that pointed you? And social network analysis. How does it point you to what you want to look at in depth? And then what are different frames for understanding it? So we have conversation analysis, narrative analysis, and different things like that. So, if you're interested, I thought it was very cool because there's not a lot of books where you get a qualitative and a quantitative researcher kind of coming together to write a book about research, but it sort of takes you from basic assumptions and questions through the analysis. And from what I've heard from the students, I teach with it, and Trina's done some workshops with it. People find it very helpful for research, looking at how people talk online.
Oh, yes, they do. In fact, it was on my shelf and it's no longer there because someone stole my book. One of my students has my book somewhere. I will say Trina's become a rock star. Did she double major in IST and language education? Was she a double? I'm
I am not sure.
thinking she might have
Maybe.
been. Yeah.
She's a
Or,
qualitative rock star for sure, though.
but she was offered full professor at Georgia just because, and she didn't have to go up for full. They just hired her and just gave her that because of the book on qualitative tools, right? So what kind of software tools can help you analyze your data other than in vivo and the common ones? So that got her on the map. Sometimes you have to find the thing that hasn't been done and then come out with a book on it. Does anyone want? I got more questions, but does anyone want to jump in here before we go to a couple more of mine? I see a lot of heads raised. Yes, go ahead and jump in. Anyone? There's nothing on the chat, so anyone's fair game. Quiet, please. All right. If you want me to keep going, I can. Yeah, go ahead, please. Sihan, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I was preparing dinner for my boy, so I have to, turn off my video. So I have been reading through your Learn website recently after Dr. Bonk shared the message, and I have found it very informative and very helpful. So I was reading through, the section Learning Analytics 101. I think that's, yeah, thank you so much for putting everything together. So I printed out the papers and then I was reading through the books and the papers. Yeah, it's very helpful. So I have a quick question about machine learning. I understand, on your in your YouTube video on the Learn website, yeah, you talk about the framework, before you jump to the technical part, we have to design and define the problem and then go from theory and then define the methodology and then use pick some kind of data science techniques. And yeah, go through. So it's a whole framework. I totally agree with that. But in terms of machine learning, I kind of want to learn more about it, and then to see how maybe how to use machine learning techniques to in education. I wonder, like, your students, how did they learn machine learning? They just self-learn, or are there courses offered and by your program? Or yes, I noticed your students publish some papers using machine learning techniques in education. Yeah, so I kind of want to go. I want to learn more about it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm very glad that the website is useful. We put that together for people who wanted to learn more about learning analytics. So I've been told it's more of a 201 than a 101. So we're trying to find some more introductory materials. There's lots of ways to learn about machine learning techniques. If you want to just learn how to run, I don't know, topic modeling, social network analysis, NLP, predictive modeling, you can find plenty of technical courses to do that. There's tons of MOOCs. These are just straight data science techniques. And that is certainly useful and powerful. If you're going to learn a programming language to run these things in, I'd say R or Python are definitely the ones to invest time in. But lots of code has been written already. So you don't have to be a top level programmer to do these things. What you need to do is you need to understand what are you trying to model and how will the algorithm do that? And specifically, how do you set up the parameters in a way that it's going to do what you want? And so, we see lots of people, they'll do, they'll do a cluster analysis and you ask, well, how did you end up with the number of clusters? And they don't really have an answer. So, we have a learning analytics specialization in our master's. So we have a couple of courses on this. And then we have a bunch of courses that are offered through our applied statistics program. And I don't remember the names of the different programs at IU, but I'm sure that you've got something similar to applied statistics where you could take, a course on social network analysis and the like. I will say the most useful course actually, though, is something, we have a course called Messy Data, and that's the one I would say to take first, because the truth is I don't know, 80% of data modeling is getting your data organized and clean before you do something powerful with it. And so, people like to think it's the cool technique, but I'd say picking the right technique and getting your data clean beforehand is probably the most important thing. But it really is about trying to understand what a technique can help you do. We actually have a center for data science at NYU, and we often get students from there who come over for internships, and they are very, very good technically, but they don't always know from an education perspective what kind of machine learning technique, supervised, unsupervised, are we looking at networks, are we modeling language, to apply. And so really understanding what does this technique do? What does it tell me, and what situations is it appropriate? I know that's not technical, but I think that's as if not more important than being able to run it, because especially once you're, moving your career, once you're a professor, you can hire someone who can run an algorithm for you and set it up, but they're not going to be able to know how to set it up to answer questions that are meaningful. And that's the piece that you really need to know.
Thank you very much.
So Zihong got her doctorate looking at digital badging at a program at IUPUI. And after getting a doctorate, she decided to come back for her MBA in learning analytics. So just a lot of my students want to get multiple degrees, which is great. So you have a lot of work really to large data sets, which is the hot topic today in learning analytics, which is why Zihong is studying learning analytics today. The use of learning analytics, applications of learning analytics can inform educators, policymakers, politicians, even teachers on a day-to-day basis, with individual students and so forth. How do you add the human element in when you have all this data and all this analysis of such data? Where does it? And that's, I guess, what you said earlier. You made a comment about that conference or symposium you're running is going to add the human element. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, the first decade of learning analytics was trying to understand, what does data look like? What can we do with it? How can we analyze it? And that was great. But then a lot of studies showed that we built amazing tools that people weren't using. So I'd say, learning analytics 2.0 is all about centering humans and their work. So it's not about, what is the data going to do, but how is the data going to help me do what I was trying to do already better, or realize something new that I'm trying to do. So the workshop that we ran on Monday, for example, we got the data ahead of time, we processed it, we cleaned it, we figured out a lot of ways we could visualize it. But then in the session, we were actually generating questions. So what kinds of questions would you want to ask of the data? And then if you got the answer, what would you do? The other thing we see a lot in learning analytics is a lot of nice to know. Oh, looks like students study more on Monday night than Tuesday night. Cool. But how's that going to change how you teach? How's it going to change how you study? So I have a PhD student, Youngji Jung, who is amazing. She's actually graduating this year, and she's going to be going down to Memphis to start a professor position. And her big focus for learning analytics is on actionability. And so it's all about, how do you develop analytics that people take action on? And so she developed a whole design protocol with students to create analytics that they will take action on. And what's interesting is it resulted in a very different kind of tool. It's not a dashboard, there's no visualizations. It's an email with recommendations that are clickable that you get once a week. So, we think about, how do we make something that fits into our lives as teachers and students, that doesn't add to the work, but makes our lives easier and more efficient and hopefully more effective. That's where a lot of the human comes in. So at the end of the day, if humans don't use these tools, then the tools themselves don't really make an impact.
Do we have any questions from the audience? I know Kim came for a reason. She's at SUNY Cobleskill, I think, in the agriculture department. Kim, since you made a special trip here, do you have a question? And you have the New York accent too, so
Oh yeah. So yeah, I don't have any specific questions, but what you just chatted about would really help me, because right now I am currently teaching a 16-hour course load, and I have about 175 students in total with 55 advisees. So I have a full-time teaching position here as an associate professor. But I guess for my question, I am scrapping my original dissertation proposal that I had come up with because of some changes that are going on in my department. And when you're scrapping an idea and moving on, because I've heard that over the past talk about the many different things that you have done. Where do you think that you would start? What would you do going forward in learning analytics?
I mean, but what I would do isn't necessarily what you should do, right? Like what I should do is driven by my values and what I find interesting and important. And for me right now, it's about the humans, and it's about making changes that I think make an important difference. So to me, it's a very values driven kind of approach. I mean, the pressure we get all the time is how can you predict who's going to have trouble because we either want to help those people or we want to, fix that problem. And I'm not that interested in that. I don't think that's really where we should be spending our time and attention. I think there's interesting strands in learning analytics. There's professional analytics, helping people understand their competencies. There's a lot of stuff on personal learning analytics, sort of, related to sort of emotions and skills. I would say there's been a ton more done about sort of a teacher gaze looking at students and thinking about how could students be empowered with data on themselves, I think is a more maybe interesting and agentic way to look at it. And I think that's a pretty, not completely untapped, but there's a lot less that's been done there. And, one thing we found, we've done design sessions with students again and again. And when you find out what they want to know, it's not the same as the data we have. So I would argue that right now, we really need to think about generating the right data sources before we, right now we're trying to do a lot with the data we have, and that's not always actually maybe the data we need.
Great. Ibrahim's with us, and he's studying augmented reality reading among Yemeni youths and analyzing his data set now. And he's been kind of quiet here. I wonder if Ibrahim has a comment. There he is. Would you like to ask a question or make a comment, Ibrahim?
It is interesting. I mean, in my case, my research was introducing augmented reality to help people who can't reach authentic resources. So back in Yemen, it is hardly to meet someone who speaks English or listen to resources. Then I thought that we can integrate augmented reality. Students can scan their materials or their textbook, and then they can watch in their cell phones the videos of native speakers read for them, videos of lectures, pictures, 3D image, something like that. But still, the main issue of this is the augmented reality technology itself is not cheap. You cannot afford. Even at IU, I reached the technology resource who are interested in this area, and we couldn't find an application that we can use. I use it at my study, HB Reveal, and then they just stopped the application. That application was an amazing one, and I couldn't find a similar one so far. But the experience was great. I'm thinking that it will be soon available everywhere, hopefully.
Alyssa, you have any comment on that?
I mean, with all the new technologies coming out, I'm a lot more excited about augmented reality than I am about virtual reality, because augmented reality helps us interact better with our world versus sort of disappearing from it. So yeah, I think it's exciting. I think the AI stuff's going to feed into that. So it sounds like you've got a lot of interesting possibilities and are barking up a productive tree, as we would say.
And Alyssa has to leave in a minute or so, maybe 30 seconds. Who would like to have the final comment or question before she runs off? I hate to let her go here, but we have to be cognizant of time. Does anyone have something pressing that they've came to ask and didn't ask it? Yua Chen's up in Toronto. She's a Canadian. Yua Chen, you want to just at least say hi and use your Canadian accent?
I don't know whether I have a Canadian accent. Hi, Alyssa. So I'm in Toronto. I passed my qualifying exam over a year ago. So I'm still right now debating what topic to move forward with. I think my challenge is I work in a large organization with a lot of employee data, but having access to data is considered privacy and confidentiality issues. So I don't know whether you have a similar challenge, but like when you're deciding your research topics and the constraints on data access, how do you get around that?
Well, I don't know that you get around it. I think, there's lots of issues around data privacy in the university. What I would say is one of the policies that we have is always sort of being able to demonstrate a clear and driving need for why we need this data and what it's going to help accomplish, which I think helps make the case. But the other thing is we kind of try to ask for sort of the amount and form of data that has the most limited impact on privacy. So there's certain kinds of data that they're happy to share with us as long as it's already been scraped to personally identifiable information. And so, you can't get around a lot of things, but there's things that you can do when you're aggregating data. There's things that you can do, depends what your questions are. So showing that there's a clear and driving need to see this data and that you're doing it in the least invasive way possible goes a long way. But you may also have to realize, okay, they're not going to give me anything personal, but maybe they'll aggregate it up. Maybe they'll let me look at this in a higher level way. Depends a lot about the specific questions you have.
Thank you.
And UHN's in a corporate setting. And again, I'm going to look at either, something to do with adaptive learning or personalized kinds of things that are happening there. But it's hard to find a population and get approval. I want to say thank you to Alyssa and ask her one little question. Are you coming to AERA in Chicago?
It's a great question. I had planned to go, but now I probably won't. It's so close to LAC in the end of the semester. So probably not, I'm afraid.
So you will not see her at AERA in Chicago, but when you go to New York next time, don't go to Times Square. Instead, go to Greenwich Village and just walk a little bit further to the Learning Analytics Research Network, the Learn people, and pop in and say hi or make an appointment to do so. I contacted her last June when I was in New York, too late. I said, I'm here today for a few more hours.
Yeah, I was going to say, definitely send me a heads up. New York life is crazy. So stop by, but if you want to actually see us, send us an email a week beforehand at least.
NSU is a lovely campus, and all the cafes close by are great meeting points. So you had a chance to meet her virtually, try and meet up with her sometime physically. Maybe we could all get together next year at AERA in Orlando or something like that. Again, let's give her a round of applause and thank her very much.
Excuse me. Actually, I think that Lune has another questions. Yeah.
What was that?
Lune has another questions before you go. So if
Sorry,
you
I kind of need to run. I'm sorry.
She has to run.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
to be somewhere in
Thank
8
you.
minutes. So
Unfortunately,
I
so
apologize.
send
I
it
think your
to.
question was about assessment. Short answer is I don't think learning
Okay.
analytics should be used for any assessment except formative. That would be my stance on it. I think that there's a lot of problems of inference. So I know that's a very quick answer to a deep question, but that's what I can give you. And I'm sorry I have to run.
Thank you.
Let's give her a
Thank
round
you.
of applause here again. And for my students, we'll take a 5-minute, 10-minute break and come back. Everyone else, thanks for coming in here. I'll be talking about writing and publishing after break. So
Oh, I wish I could stay.
my
Thanks,
tips.
Kurt. Take care,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you again. Bye-bye. Okay, so for my students, if you have my handout from last time, anyone's welcome to stay. I'm going through my 10 years before handout and 10 years after. There's a rock group at one point called 10 Years After. Only Rachel remembers that, maybe she doesn't. I'm older than her. So anyways, that was great. That was fun to have her. And it was great to have everyone. And let's just take, it's not going to be, we won't go long tonight. Let's put it that way. In part, I have 2 things due by midnight if I don't get them into I'm SOL. So, there's a lot of things due this time of year. It's the last day of the month. That's why. And tomorrow we'll get 2 more things that are, but I got the ones for tomorrow in already. It's the ones for tonight I haven't. I got 1 hour's sleep last night. Let's put it that way. But I'm raring to go, as Ibrahim knows, anytime, and,
Okay, I'm a little bit relieved when you say that you just slept 1 hour. This explains a lot of things. Okay.
Well, you only get 1 hour with your young child at home for a long time, and maybe your kid's a little bigger now, 2 or 3 years old now. So
He is 3 weeks and now in daycare for the first time.
So you're getting some
So
sleep.
we
Okay.
leave him there. We stay with Amani to a library close to his daycare, and we study in the morning.
That's a smart move. I'll be back in 5 minutes. I won't take long here. And I'm gonna. Oh, I didn't stop the recording, did I? So I will stop the recording at this point, and I'll start a new recording.